I woke up from emergency surgery with a bandage around my abdomen and divorce papers on my hospital bedside table. My husband of 7 years had left them there while I was unconscious, fighting for my life after a ruptured appendix. The note attached said, "I can't do this anymore. You're always sick. I need someone who can keep up with my lifestyle. My lawyer will be in touch." I stared at those words until they blurred. Blake Morrison had promised to love me in sickness and in health. Apparently, that promise expired the moment I became inconvenient. He was a mid-level sales manager at a tech company, always obsessed with appearances, always climbing social ladders. I was a software engineer who loved my work more than networking events. He said I was holding him back, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I'd never amount to anything. 3 years later, I stood in the boardroom of Morrison Tech Industries as the newly appointed CEO. The company Blake worked for had just been acquired by my corporation. And now, the man who abandoned me in a hospital bed was sitting across from me, pale and terrified, begging me not to fire him. This is my story. I met Blake Morrison when I was 26 and working as a junior software developer at a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle. He was 28, charming, and exactly the kind of confident man I'd always been attracted to. I was quiet, focused on my code, uncomfortable at company parties. Blake was the opposite. He walked into rooms like he owned them. When he asked me out, I couldn't believe someone like him would notice someone like me. Our first date was at an expensive restaurant I couldn't afford. He paid without blinking and told me about his plans to become a senior sales director before he turned 35. He talked about luxury cars, vacation homes, and the lifestyle he intended to build. I talked about the app one was developing in my spare time. He smiled politely but clearly wasn't interested. I should have seen the warning signs then. But I was lonely and he made me feel special. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The wedding was extravagant, funded mostly by his parents who wanted to show off their successful son. My parents, both teachers, contributed what they could. It wasn't enough for Blake's standards, but he accepted it with a tight smile. The first few years of marriage were okay. Not great, but okay. Blake worked long hours in sales, closing deals and attending networking events. I worked long hours writing code, debugging systems, and slowly climbing the ranks at my company. We lived separate lives that occasionally intersected at home. The problem started when I got promoted to senior developer. I was excited. Blake was threatened. "You're making almost as much as me now," he said one night over dinner. "Isn't that a good thing?" "Yes. We have more money." "It's emasculating," he replied. "People are going to think I married you for your income." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. From that point forward, Blake became increasingly critical of my career. He said I worked too much, that I cared more about computers than him, that I was boring at his work events because I didn't know how to schmooze with his colleagues. I started feeling guilty for my success. I began downplaying my achievements to make him feel better. When I was offered a team lead position, I almost turned it down because I knew it would upset him. Then I started getting sick. It began with stomach pain that I ignored for months because I was too busy with work. When I finally went to the doctor, they ran tests but couldn't find anything definitive. Blake was annoyed by the medical appointments. "You're always at the doctor," he complained. "It's probably just stress. Maybe if you didn't work so much, you'd feel better." The pain got worse. I had episodes where I'd double over in agony, unable to move. Blake would sigh and say, "Again," like I was inconveniencing him on purpose. One night, about 6 years into our marriage, I collapsed in the kitchen. The pain was so intense I couldn't breathe. Blake called 911, but I could hear the irritation in his voice as he explained to the operator that his wife was having another episode. At the hospital, they diagnosed me with chronic inflammatory bowel disease. It was manageable with medication, but it meant I'd deal with symptoms for the rest of my life. Blake's reaction wasn't sympathy. It was resentment. "So you're going to be sick forever?" he asked. "Great. That's just great." I tried to be the perfect wife despite my illness. I kept working, kept managing our household, kept pretending everything was fine. But Blake grew more distant. He started coming home later. He stopped asking how I felt. He made comments about other women at his office who were energetic and fun to be around. I knew what he was implying. One Friday night, 7 years into our marriage, I woke up at 2 a.m. with the worst pain I'd ever experienced. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I tried to wake Blake, but he was in the guest room. He'd been sleeping there for months. I stumbled down the hallway, barely able to stand, and pounded on his door. He opened it, annoyed. "What now?" "Something's wrong," I gasped. "I need to go to the hospital." He looked at me with pure frustration. "Can't it wait until morning? I have an important client meeting at 9. "Blake, please," I begged. "I think my appendix ruptured." He drove me to the emergency room in silence. His jaw clenched in anger. At the hospital, doctors confirmed my appendix had ruptured. I needed emergency surgery immediately. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I reached for Blake's hand. He pulled away. I woke up in a recovery room 6 hours later. The surgery had been complicated. The ruptured appendix had caused an infection that spread through my abdomen. I'd need weeks of recovery and antibiotics. My first thought was relief that I was alive. My second thought was wondering where Blake was. A nurse came in to check my vitals. "Your husband left about an hour ago," she said gently. "He said he had to get back to work." My stomach sank. Not from pain, but from the realization that I'd married someone who couldn't even stay while I recovered from emergency surgery. Then I saw it. An envelope on the bedside table. My name is written in Blake's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by him. All I had to do was sign and it would be over. There was a note attached. "I can't do this anymore. You're always sick. I need someone who can keep up with my lifestyle. My lawyer will be in touch. Blake." I read it 3 times. Then I started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was so cruel it became absurd. The nurse heard me laughing and came back in, concerned. "Honey, are you okay?" I showed her the papers. She read them and her face went pale. "He left you divorce papers while you were in surgery?" I nodded, still laughing through tears. That's one of the most heartless things I've ever seen," she said. "And I've been a nurse for 20 years. The laughter stopped. Reality crashed down. My husband had abandoned me at my lowest point. Left me alone in a hospital bed to recover from a life-threatening surgery while he went back to his comfortable life. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Blake had shown me exactly who he was. And I was finally free. I signed the papers right there in the hospital bed. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I just signed, put them back in the envelope, and asked the nurse to mail them for me. If he wanted out that badly, I wasn't going to fight. I was going to let him go and rebuild my life without him. I had no idea then that 3 years later, I'd be the one with all the power. The divorce was quick and brutal. Blake wanted it finalized as fast as possible. He took half of everything we'd built together, which wasn't much since most of our assets were tied up in the house. He let me keep the house only because he didn't want to deal with selling it. His lawyer made sure to emphasize that Blake was being generous by not fighting for more. I recovered from surgery alone. My parents flew out to help for a few weeks, but they lived across the country and couldn't stay forever. Friends from work visit occasionally, but most people don't know how to act around someone going through a medical crisis and a divorce simultaneously. I spent a lot of time alone, thinking about the 7 years I'd wasted on someone who saw me as a burden. I thought about all the times I'd made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I thought about the career opportunities I'd downplayed because he felt threatened. And I made a decision. I was done being small. I was done prioritizing other people's comfort over my own success. From that point forward, I was going to be ruthlessly focused on my own goals. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I went back to work. My company had been supportive during my medical leave, and my position as team lead was still waiting for me. But I didn't just slip back into my old routine. I started working differently, strategically. Before Blake, I'd been content to do good work and hope someone noticed. Now I made sure people noticed. I documented every project's success. I presented my team's achievements in company meetings. I networked with senior leadership. I did all the things Blake had accused me of not doing. Within 3 months, I was promoted to engineering manager. Within 6 months, I was managing 3 teams. Within a year, I was director of engineering. My salary doubled, then tripled. Bought a new car. I renovated the house. I started speaking at tech conferences. People in the industry began recognizing my name. Everything Blake said I'd never accomplish, I was accomplishing. And I was doing it without him. Better yet, I was doing it because of his absence. He'd been holding me back. The moment he left, I soared. About 18 months after the divorce, I was recruited by a venture capital firm that specialized in tech startups. They wanted someone with operational experience to help evaluate potential investments. The pay was extraordinary. The opportunity was once in a lifetime. Took it. For the next year, I traveled the country meeting with founders, analyzing business models, and helping portfolio companies scale. I learned more about business in that year than I had in my entire career. I learned how to identify opportunities, how to negotiate deals, how to think strategically about growth. I also learned that I was good at it. Really good. One of the portfolio companies I worked with was a small software firm called Apex Digital Solutions. They had incredible technology but terrible leadership. The CEO was brilliant technically but had no business sense. Within 6 months of my involvement, I'd helped them restructure, hire a real sales team, and land 3 major contracts. Their valuation quadrupled. The VC firm was impressed. So impressed that when Apex's CEO decided to step down, they offered me the position. I became CEO of Apex Digital Solutions 2 years after Blake left me in that hospital bed. I was 35 years old. The company had 60 employees and 12 million in annual revenue. Not huge but growing fast. My strategy was simple. Acquire smaller companies with good technology and integrate them into our platform. I used the relationships I'd built in venture capital to raise funding. We went on an acquisition spree. Within a year, we'd acquired 4 companies and doubled in size. Within 2 years, we had 200 employees and 50 million in revenue. The tech industry started paying attention. Articles were written about our growth strategy. I was invited to speak at conferences about scaling startups. Forbes mentioned me in an article about rising female CEOs. I'd become exactly what Blake said I'd never be. Successful, visible, and impossible to ignore. I thought about him sometimes. I wondered if he knew what I'd become. I wondered if he regretted his decision. But mostly I didn't think about him at all. He was irrelevant to my life now. Or so I thought. 3 years after Blake filed for divorce, my executive team presented me with an acquisition opportunity. A mid-sized tech company called Morrison Technologies. The name caught my attention immediately. I pulled up their website. The company had been founded 15 years ago and specialized in enterprise sales software. They had solid revenue but were struggling with outdated technology and losing market share to competitors. What made them valuable was their client list. They had relationships with Fortune 500 companies that would take years for us to build independently. Acquiring them would instantly give us access to those clients. My CFO recommended moving forward. The valuation was reasonable, and the strategic fit was perfect. I agreed to begin due diligence. Then I looked at their employee list. There, listed as regional sales manager, was Blake Morrison. My ex-husband. The man who abandoned me during emergency surgery worked for the company we were about to acquire. I sat in my office for a long time, staring at his name on my screen. Then I smiled. This was going to be interesting. I didn't tell anyone about my connection to Blake. As far as my team knew, he was just another employee at a company we were acquiring. I maintained complete professionalism throughout the due diligence process. We reviewed their financials, interviewed key staff, and assessed cultural fit. Everything checked out. 6 weeks after we began negotiations, the deal closed. Apex Digital Solutions acquired Morrison Technologies for $85 million. We now had 400 employees and were on track to hit $100 million in annual revenue. The acquisition was announced to all staff via email on a Monday morning. We'd be integrating the teams over the next 3 months. There would be redundancies, and some positions would be eliminated. Department heads would evaluate all employees to determine who stayed and who would receive severance packages. I scheduled meetings with all Morrison Technologies department heads that week. Blake's manager was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I wondered if Blake knew yet, if he'd seen my name on the acquisition announcement, if he'd realized that his ex-wife, the one he called unambitious, was now his CEO. Thursday afternoon arrived. Blake's manager, a man named Trevor Hayes, came to my office for his meeting. We discussed the sales team structure, which clients were most valuable, and which team members were essential. Then I asked about Blake. Blake Morrison, I said, looking at his file. Tell me about him. Trevor hesitated. Blake's complicated. He's been with the company for 8 years. He's good at maintaining existing relationships, but he hasn't closed a new major deal in over 2 years. His sales numbers are declining. Honestly, if we were making cuts, he'd probably be on the list. Why hasn't he been let go already? Yes. Politics, Trevor said with a shrug. He's friends with the old CEO. But now that you've acquired us, that protection is gone. I nodded slowly. Set up a meeting with him. Tomorrow morning. I want to personally review all underperforming staff before making final decisions. Trevor looked surprised but agreed. After he left, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Blake had spent our entire marriage telling me I wasn't ambitious enough, that I'd never be successful, that I was holding him back. Tomorrow he'd sit across from me and learn exactly how wrong he'd been. Friday morning I arrived at the office early. I reviewed Blake's performance file one more time. The numbers were clear. He was coasting, doing the minimum to keep his job while collecting a decent salary. He'd plateaued years ago and never pushed himself to grow. His performance reviews mentioned lack of initiative and resistance to new strategies. This was the man who criticized my career ambitions, who said I wasn't driven enough, who left me because I wasn't keeping up with his lifestyle. He hadn't built any lifestyle. He'd barely maintained the one he had. At 10 a.m., my assistant called to say Blake Morrison had arrived for his meeting. Send him in, I said. I stood up, smoothed my suit, and positioned myself behind my desk. The door opened. Blake walked in looking at his phone. He glanced up to greet me and froze. All color drained from his face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. I stared at him with complete calm. Finally I said, "Hello, Blake. Please have a seat." He didn't move. "This is a joke," he said. His voice cracked. "This is some kind of joke." "It's not a joke," I replied calmly. "I'm the CEO of Apex Digital Solutions. We acquired Morrison Technologies last month. I'm reviewing all staff, and your performance has been flagged as concerning. That's why you're here." Blake still hadn't moved from the doorway. He looked like he might pass out. You're a CEO?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Blake. We have things to discuss." He stumbled to the chair and collapsed into it. His hands were shaking. "I don't understand," he said. "How is this possible? You were just a developer. You were just what?" "Yes. Unambitious. A dreamer. Someone who'd never amount to anything. I believe those were your words." He closed his eyes. "How long have you been CEO?" 2 years, I said. "Before that, I worked in venture capital. Before that, I was director of engineering at my previous company. I've been climbing quite steadily since our divorce." You did this to get back at me, Blake said suddenly. You acquired my company to get revenge. I laughed. Actually, I laughed. Blake, I didn't even know you worked here until after we'd decided to acquire the company. You're not that important. This was a business decision. The fact that you work here is just a happy coincidence. Blake's face went from pale to red. You can't fire me because we used to be married. That's illegal. That's discrimination. I can fire you for poor performance, I said calmly. Which is exactly what your file shows. You haven't closed a major deal in 2 years. Your sales numbers are declining. Your manager recommended you for elimination before he even knew about our connection. I slid his performance reviews across the desk. Read them. This has nothing to do with our past. This is about your present. He didn't read them. He just stared at me. I made a mistake, he said quietly. Is that what you want to hear? I made a mistake leaving you. I've regretted it every day since. I leaned back in my chair. Let me tell you something, Blake. I spent the first few months after you left me devastated. I thought I'd done something wrong. That I'd failed as a wife. That my illness made me unlovable. But eventually I realized something. You leaving me was the best thing that ever happened. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Because once you were gone, I stopped making myself smaller. I stopped hiding my ambitions. I stopped letting someone else's insecurity dictate my potential. You were holding me back. And you were too insecure to even realize it. Blake's eyes were watering now. I was wrong about everything. You see that? I was stupid and scared, and I threw away the best thing in my life. The best thing in your life. I repeated. You left me divorce papers while I was recovering from emergency surgery. You said I was a burden. That I'd never be successful. That I was holding you back from the lifestyle you deserved. I know, he whispered. I was awful. I was the worst kind of person. But I've changed. I've spent 3 years regretting what I did. That's not my problem, I said simply. Your regret doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't change the fact that when I needed you most, you abandoned me. And it certainly doesn't change your performance record at this company. Blake leaned forward desperately. Please, don't fire me. I need this job. I'll do anything. I'll work harder. I'll close new deals. Just give me a chance. I considered him for a long moment. Then I said, I'm not firing you. Relief flooded his face. But I'm not keeping you in your current position either. You're being moved to a junior sales associate role. 50% pay cut. You'll report to someone half your age. You'll be starting over. Blake's relief turned to horror. You can't do that. I have 8 years of experience. I have relationships with clients. I'm a regional manager. You were a regional manager, I corrected. At a company that no longer exists as an independent entity. In our structure, your position is redundant. Your options are to take the junior role or accept a severance package and leave. Your choice. This is revenge, he said bitterly. You're punishing me. I'm giving you the same treatment I'd give any underperforming employee, I replied. Actually, I'm being more generous. Most people in your position would just be let go. But because of our history, I'm offering you a chance to prove yourself. Start over. Build your way back up. Show me you're actually capable of the ambition you claim to have. Blake sat there defeated. Finally, he said, if I take the junior role, will you ever forgive me? Will we ever have a chance again? I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Blake, there is no we. There hasn't been for 3 years. Whatever feelings I had for you died in that hospital room. I don't hate you. I don't love you. I don't know you. You're just an employee now. Nothing more. Blake took the junior role. He had no choice. The severance package wasn't generous enough for him to walk away cleanly, and he knew finding another regional manager position with his recent performance record would be difficult. For the next 6 months, I watched him struggle. He wasn't used to starting over. He wasn't used to being the low man on the team. The young manager he reported to had no patience for his excuses. Blake had to cold call prospects, write his own presentations, and fight for every small deal. Everything he'd avoided doing for years by coasting on existing relationships. Some people at the company figured out we had history. Rumors spread. But I never addressed them. I kept every interaction with Blake purely professional. In meetings, I treated him exactly like every other junior associate, with polite distance. He tried to talk to me several times outside of work contexts. He sent emails that weren't about business. He left messages with my assistant. I never responded to anything personal. He didn't exist to me outside of his role at the company. Slowly, something interesting happened. Blake actually started working. Maybe it was humiliation. Maybe it was a necessity. But he began closing small deals. His numbers improved. He started acting like someone who actually wanted to succeed. A year after the acquisition, Blake had worked his way up to a mid-level sales position. Not where he'd been before, but better than where he'd started. He was earning about 70% of his old salary. At our company's annual review meeting, his manager actually praised his improvement. Blake Morrison has shown significant growth this year, Trevor said. He's become a reliable contributor. If he maintains this trajectory, he could be eligible for promotion to senior associate next year. After the meeting, Blake approached me in the hallway. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Check my watch. You have 2 minutes." We stepped into an empty conference room. Blake took a deep breath. "I want to thank you for giving me a second chance. I didn't deserve it, but you gave it to me anyway." "I didn't give you anything," I said. "You earned your position through your work. That's how this company operates." "Still," he persisted, "I want you to know that this year has taught me more than the previous 8 years combined. I was complacent, entitled. I thought I deserved success without earning it. You were right about everything." I looked at Blake carefully. He'd aged in the past year. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked tired but different somehow. Less arrogant, more real. "I'm glad you've learned from this experience," I said. "But Blake, you need to understand something. This isn't a redemption arc where we end up back together. This isn't a movie where the guy realizes his mistakes and wins back the girl. That's not happening." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking if we can ever be friends. If you can ever forgive me. Not for us, just for you. Because I think holding on to that anger must be exhausting." I almost laughed. "I'm not angry, Blake. I haven't been angry for a long time. I'm grateful. You forced me to become someone I never would have become if we'd stayed married. You leaving me was the catalyst for everything good in my life now." He absorbed that. "So you really don't hate me?" "I really don't," I confirmed. "I don't feel anything about you. You're just someone I used to know who now works for my company. That's the extent of our relationship." Blake nodded slowly. "That's actually worse than hate, isn't it?" "Probably," I agreed. "But it's honest." The narrator's journey to success culminated 2 years after her company's acquisition when Apex Digital Solutions went public. The IPO valued the company at $600 million, making the 38-year-old narrator a multimillionaire CEO. The celebration was a glamorous affair in Seattle, which her ex-husband, Blake, attended as a mid-level employee. During her speech, the narrator acknowledged the team and board, intentionally omitting any mention of Blake, their divorce, or the difficult period of rebuilding after he abandoned her during emergency surgery. She maintained a composed, professional demeanor while networking, and observed Blake watching her from across the room. His small, saluting gesture confirmed her success, but she realized her true victory wasn't about making him regret leaving, though he clearly did, or proving him wrong. Instead, winning was about her own transformation. Betrayal had fueled her ambition, allowing her to rise from being a burden to becoming the successful woman she was meant to be. 6 months after the IPO, the narrator began dating Caleb Torres, a kind and brilliant computer science professor at the University of Washington. Caleb admired her success and was unthreatened by her career. She confidently dismissed his concerns that Blake might be lingering at the company, hoping for reconciliation, asserting that she had moved on completely. 3 years after the divorce, the narrator reflected on her achievements from her 20th floor corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline. Her company employed over 500 people, had expanded to 4 cities, and had just secured a deal with a major bank. She was featured in Fortune magazine and spoke at prestigious conferences. Crucially, her health was stable, and she was thriving, the direct opposite of the burden Blake had discarded. She concluded that being abandoned had set her free, allowing the worst day of her life to become the launchpad for her best years. Blake's presence at the company ended when he submitted his resignation for a senior sales position at a competitor. His farewell note, forwarded by his manager, expressed regret for the divorce and gratitude for the professional lessons learned while working under her. The narrator approved his resignation without drama, viewing him solely as a former employee. On the day Blake left, she was in a board meeting planning the acquisition of a company 3 times the size of Apex Digital Solutions. Later, she deleted an old photo of herself from the hospital bed, a moment she had saved to remember her decision to stop being a victim. Her final realization was that she had proven everything she needed to prove, not to Blake, but to herself. The man who said she would never amount to anything became just an employee who once worked for her. This was not revenge. It was justice, which she considered the sweetest victory of all.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching karma, payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.